Hey you guys, in this video I'm going to tell you everything you need to know about guitar strings. Right off the bat, if you're standing in the guitar store looking at a wall of strings wondering what to get, just get these. These are D'Addario NYXL 10 to 46. If that was all you wanted, thanks for being here. Please leave a like on your way out to, compensate for the lost watch time. But for everybody else who actually wants to understand guitar strings and learn about them, I had D'Addario send me basically one of everything they make in the realm of electric guitar strings. And we're going to break down the different factors that go into a string and how these different factors actually affect it in the real world and how that affects your purchase decision. I don't often make gear videos on this channel, but I want to start doing this series every now and again where we can go really deep on one subject so that you guys can really understand this stuff. Now, even though D'Addario sent me these strings, I want to say that they are not sponsoring this. They didn't pay me anything. I reached out to them because I've actually just personally been playing D'Addario for years, and I asked for a specific set of guitar strings, which are all the ones you see here that we're going to compare, and they were really great to work with. So a huge thank you to them. Also, if you want to get any of these for yourself, check out the affiliate links in the description below. So the way this video is going to work is I'm going to give you guys an overview of all the factors that go into a guitar string, then we're going to do our in-depth playing comparisons, and at the end I'm going to give you guys my summary of thoughts and exactly my recommendations. Now I know I gave it away at the beginning, but there is more to it. There's certain use cases that we're going to go over, as well as kind of a good, better, best system. So let's start with the factors that affect a guitar string. I think there's really 4 factors that go into how you're making your purchase decision on guitar strings. Number 1 is what metal the strings are made out of. Number 2 is the size of the strings. Number 3 is the wind of the strings. And number 4 is whether or not the strings are coated. The different metals are pretty straightforward. Different strings are made out of different metals, right? These are chromes, these are steels, these are nickel-plated steel. Different metals sound and can feel a little bit different. The next factor, size, we'll go into really deeply later, but I just want to clarify right off the bat that when we're talking about size of a string, we're not talking about like length or anything, we're talking about diameter. These are really thin and these are really thick. We'll compare these later on. Next, we have the wind of the strings. You have normal round wounds, you have flat wounds, and you have semi-flat wounds. Again, we're going to compare them all. Then finally, you have whether or not a string is coated. These are uncoated, these are coated. All a coating is a very thin layer of plastic that goes on the outside of the string to help extend the life of the string. Again, we'll go into more detail and compare later. Our comparison is going to begin with the XL line of strings. We're going to start with chrome strings, which are supposed to be pretty warm sounding. We're going to move into pure nickel strings and then nickel-plated steel, which is kind of the middle ground. That's kind of my recommendation. And then we'll get into the steel strings. There's some other little factors, including wind and that kind of thing, that we'll go into with these. Those will be in the in-depth comparisons. Then we're going to go over the coated strings. These are the XT strings. They're coated a little bit. And then the XS strings, which are coated a lot. We're going to wrap up our playing comparison by going over gauge. Like I said, we'll start with the smallest strings and then go to the biggest strings we have. Like I said, we're going to start our comparison by just going over the different metals. And let's start right in the middle, what I think is kind of a neutral choice that works well for a lot of people. This is a pack of strings I had up just a second ago, but this is the XL 10 to 46 nickel wound. And one final note before we get our comparison going, within the different areas of comparison that we're going to be doing, we're going to be controlling for as many variables as we can. So while we're comparing metals, none of these strings are coated, right? And they're all 10 gauge. They all start, the high E string is going to be, 0.01 millimeters. That is a 10 gauge. These are 10 to 46. I think some of them are, 10 to 48. One is 10 to 45. But they're all mostly, almost exactly the same size. None of them are coated. When we move on to the coated section, those are going to be 10 gauge, and it's going to be the same kind of metal. When we get to comparing just the gauge, the metal and the coating is going to be controlled. So you guys see, you guys will see that as we compare the strings. But I just wanted to make that very clear off the bat. Anyway, like I said, starting with the nickel wound strings. All right, these are the regular nickel wound. These are the nickel-plated steel strings. This is just my regular 2014 Fender American Standard Stratocaster that you guys see in all the videos. I'm on the neck pickup, and I'm going into the HX Stomp, and I'm modeling a Fender Deluxe Reverb. Okay, my initial impressions are that these are really balanced sounding strings. They kind of sound like straight down the middle. They sound like the archetype of a guitar string. I know that the metallurgy on these probably isn't quite as advanced as something like the NYXLs or maybe the coated strings. So they sound great right out of the package. They theoretically won't last as long as something a little bit more upmarket like the NYXLs that we'll check out later. But if you're the kind of player that like changes your strings every week or something like that, or theoretically, you know, if you're an artist who's on tour and you're changing your strings every night, these are a great choice. I don't change my strings every week, but if I did, I'd probably just get like the 25 pack of these and call it a day. Alright guys, these are the flat wound chrome strings, and these are very warm sounding, I would say. They're very, there's a lot less like treble information than there is in some of the other strings. The other interesting thing, besides just the chrome, you know, the metallurgy making these sound a little bit warmer, is they're flat wounds. And what that means is to kind of give you, and I'll try to find a diagram to put this on the screen, but to give you an idea of how a guitar string is built, there's an inner core and then a wire, a much thinner wire that's wrapped around it. And usually that's for the E, the low E, the A, and the D. So the bottom three strings, those are the wound strings. And normally the wire that wraps around the core is just like a regular, like, round wire, so you get like the ridges that you normally feel on a string. This is a flat wound set, so I don't know if the camera's picking this up at all, but there's actually, the strings are quite a bit like shinier than normal strings, and what that means is that the wrap wire is flat. It's a very smooth feeling string. So like I said, the metal is chrome, these are flat wounds, and another interesting thing about this set is the third string, the G string, is also a wound string. You normally don't find that. Normally the top three, the G, B, and high E, don't have the wrap wire. It's just the inner core wire and that's it. That's not the case for this set. This has a wound third. So these, I would say, this set of strings is really cool. It feels significantly different from basically any other set of strings I've ever played. The instance that I would use this set of strings is probably like if I had a vintage guitar, or maybe like a custom shop guitar that was designed to be exactly like a vintage guitar, and I was trying to go for the vintage vibe, because from what I understand about like string history, I think that pretty much all strings used to be like this. The other instance where I would use these strings is probably on like a big body, like hollow jazz guitar kind of thing, because like I said, the tone is very, very warm. There's not that bright cutting like EQ curve that you normally get from strings that are like nickel-plated steel or even steel or something like that. That's the instance I would use these. I don't think these are really meant to be like a daily driver string. I know some players who swear by them though, so try them out, but these are definitely going to feel significantly different than other sets of strings. As a really quick little addition to this section of the video, D'Addario also sent me this set, which is exactly the same thing, flat wound chrome strings, but on this set the third is not wound, so it's kind of like a normal set of strings, or a more traditional, a more modern set of strings in that way. Just really quick. It sounds basically the same as just the regular flat wound chrome set. My suspicion is that this set with the plain third is probably oriented more toward a non-jazz vintage guitar, so like maybe a vintage Strat, vintage Tele, vintage Les Paul, something like that. And the wound third is probably more for, you know, like a big hollow body jazz guitar. The plain third is probably more for something where you're going to have like more bending happening on the G string. Not speaking for D'Addario's marketing team, that's just that would be the use case that I apply those two sets of strings in. Alright you guys, for our next set of strings we're going to be looking at the pure nickel strings. And these basically, you know, we talked before about the inner wire and then the wrap wire. These are back to being regular round wound plain third as standard, and something that I'm trying to get all my little details right, but I believe that for all of these strings, the inner wire is always steel. It's the wrap wire that changes. Before, we had like nickel-plated steel. That was our first, our baseline set of strings was the nickel-plated steel wrap wire. This wrap wire is pure nickel, so let's give these a shot. So on the scale of very warm sounding to very bright sounding, these were a step above the chromes, but maybe not quite as bright as the nickel-plated steel that we played earlier. Because these were just regular round wounds, I found that these were a lot more playable. I would start to consider these as not like a, I kind of think of the chromes and the flat wounds as like a weird variety option. This is just a set of strings. Maybe if you have, I'm trying to imagine a use case, maybe if you had like really, really bright pickups and you wanted a little bit warmer of a string that kind of mellowed out some of the brightness, but that still kind of felt like a normal string, you would probably pick these. Moving on. All right, now we got the Pro Steels. The core wire is steel as always, and the wrap wire on these is also pure steel. So not nickel-plated steel, but pure steel. These are supposed to be very bright, and I can already tell just acoustically they definitely are. Let's check them out. They're very loud, not just acoustically. They are loud acoustically, but they're also, I feel like there's a lot of output from the pickups. So with the brightness and the loudness, I know that a common use case for these is like heavy metal or like really aggressive guitar playing. I could also see these used to kind of brighten up very dark pickups that are probably designed to have a lot of output because they're kind of heavy metal pickups. So if you're into really heavy music, this is probably your string set. All right, you guys, our next set are the half rounds. These are very much like the Pro Steels we just played. It's an all stainless steel string, but they are, it says on the package, semi-flat wound. So I imagine the wrap wire is not quite totally round, not quite totally flat, but kind of in the middle. Let's see how they play. So they still have a lot of the brightness and, I don't know, maybe the snap is the way to describe it, the presence of stainless steel, but there is something a little bit more mellow. It's not quite warm. It's not that we're lacking treble energy, but there's just something a little bit more mellow is the only word I can think of to describe it. These are really interesting. I could see players being into these if you're not quite all the way wanting a, like a flat wound chrome string, like totally vintage, but if you think that a lot of the round wound strings, including something as sort of mild as the nickel-plated steel, is too bright, this is an interesting kind of third option. All right, you guys, next up we have the XT strings. These are just the regular, like round wound, nickel-plated steel, just the normal guitar strings, but these are coated. And if you don't know about coated strings, basically forever in the world of guitar playing, in the same way that we argue about, analog versus digital and all these very tribal things, coated versus uncoated strings is a big deal. Basically, coatings are a very, very thin little plastic coating that goes on the string to kind of make them last longer. And especially a long time ago. Like I remember when I started playing guitar like 10 years ago, coatings weren't totally new then, but they weren't as well developed as they are now, and you could really feel it. Most coated strings felt like you were playing like plastic strings. It was really thick and not very good. And we're going to plug in, I'm going to do the recording of the playing section, but the little bit of playing I've done on these already, just stringing up the guitar, these might be the breakout hit of the video, because obviously right now, I just put on the guitar. I can't speak to how long they last, but they don't feel coated at all. Like on my hands, they feel exactly like normal strings. So let's hear how they sound. Okay, so like I said, these sound and feel exactly like uncoated strings, and I mean theoretically they'll last longer. If you didn't tell me that these were coated, I wouldn't notice it. Even though I know they're coated, they don't feel any different from uncoated strings. These might be kind of the breakout hit. And to give you guys a little bit of a like inside baseball, I'm recording the playing sections first because I want to get the 13 string changes I have to do out of the way. I'm thinking about the way I'm going to do the intro to this video is say, I use the NYXLs. Like NYXLs have been my main string for years, but these might change that because they're not that much more expensive. And if they can last way longer, this is awesome. The XT coated strings. I've always been against coated strings for electric because I always felt like it's just kind of unnecessary, but especially for some of my lesser played guitars, these are definitely going to be what I do on the ones that don't get string changes as often. Alright, while we're talking about coated strings, our next string are the XS strings. And these are really cool, same underlying string, nickel-plated steel, round wound, but these basically just have more coating. And even on the package, D'Addario says maximum life and a smooth feel. So the stated goal here is just maximum life, and if we have to give up a little bit of like the feel of an uncoated string, that's, D'Addario's willing to do that. Let me play them and then I'll give you my impressions. Alright, so these are actually a pleasant surprise. I still think that the XT are the way I would go, but these are, like I said, totally competent as a coated string. I mentioned before that, back several years ago, I remember when coated strings just felt like, dipped in big, like, thick layer of goopy plastic or something like that. These definitely don't feel like that. If you had told 15-year-old me when I first started playing, that, hey, try these strings, I wouldn't guess that these were even coated. My general thought is that on acoustic guitars, that's where the real case for coated strings is made, and on electric guitars, it's a little bit less necessary. So normally I say I wouldn't spring for like a very coated string on electric guitar, but truthfully, if I had some guitars, I only have 4, but if I had some ones that were truly rare use, I have some friends that have like, everybody has that friend who's got like 20 guitars or something. On the 20th guitar, the one that's not getting played that often, this kind of a string probably makes a ton of sense. It still feels good. Like I said, it doesn't feel bad like the old school coated strings, but you do start to notice a little bit of a difference between this and an uncoated string. Actually, something that comes to mind that I want to point out is that the feel of these, like I said, it's a bit smoother of a feel. It doesn't feel, like I said, it doesn't feel like it's been coated in plastic, but you do notice, yeah, there's a bit of a slickness to these strings. It feels very, very similar to the uncoated half-wound strings, like the semi-round wound. These and those feel, very, very similar, almost identical. I don't know if that's an effective frame of reference for everybody, but my point is that they still feel like guitar strings. They feel like a different kind of a guitar string rather than a guitar string that's just been like, spray painted with like polyurethane or something. Anyway, moving on. Alright guys, in this next section of the video, we're going to be looking at string gauge, which is the size of the strings. And every single kind of string we're going to use in this next section of the video are going to be the NYXLs. And the NYXLs are just like the XLs that we were looking at earlier, in that they're uncoated, but the metallurgy is supposed to be just a little bit more advanced. Like I said, they're not coated, but they're upmarket a little bit from the regular XL strings. NYXLs have been my daily driver for years, and there's several different sizes. And the point I'm making is that the only thing that's going to change over the course of the next 5 strings we're going to look at is the size of the strings, measured in gauge. Now on this package, you can see that it says the size is 8 to 38. And what that really means is that the high E string, the small one, is 0.008 millimeters in diameter, and the thickest string, the low E string, is 0.038 millimeters in diameter. The shorthand for this, what guitar players would say, is that this is a set of 8s. The way this section is going to work is like this. Basically, I'm not going to say anything in between the string tests. I'm just going to play the string test, and I'm going to put the size of the string on the screen. We're going to start with 8s, then we're going to move to 9s, then it's going to be 10s, then 11s, and then finally 12s. Just to kind of give you an idea of what you should look out for. Generally, the advice is that smaller strings sound very consistent. They sound very even. It's almost like putting a compressor on your guitar, like in a pedal or something. It doesn't really take away your dynamic range, but there's a pleasing evenness to the sound. As strings get heavier, people say generally that there's a weight that you can kind of hear to heavier strings. They have a little bit more impact. Maybe this is because a heavier string takes more energy to get moving, so you hit it a little bit harder with your hand. It's not exactly all agreed on why heavier strings, or bigger strings kind of sound heavier, but that is the general advice. The other thing to be aware of is that smaller strings are generally a little bit more playable. So on a lot of guitars, like my Squier Stratocaster, right? That's a very beginner guitar. From the factory, it came with 9s, which are a pretty small set. And that's kind of more beginner oriented. It takes less hand strength and a little bit less dexterity to play with those. And as strings get bigger, it takes stronger and stronger hands. The legend of Stevie Ray Vaughan, part of that legend, is that he used super thick strings. People used to say, oh, he was playing 12s, and then he tried to get into like 13s and 14s, and eventually his strings were getting so big that he had to start using piano wire for the lower strings. So here we go. We're going to start with 8s, and then it'll move up from there. Okay, you guys, so now we've heard all the playing comparisons. Let's just wrap up the video with some of my concluding thoughts and what I think, what my recommendations out of all the strings that we've tried are. And as I'm shooting this, I realize when I look at the monitor that I'm wearing 2 logos right now, which I never try to do. I apologize to everyone. So starting with the NYXLs in all the different gauges. Basically, the NYXLs are my recommendation for the daily driver string for everybody. It's what I've used for years, and it's probably what I'm going to keep using on all my main guitars that I play a lot for years. So on my red Stratocaster, my white PRS, and my Telecaster replacement when I buy it, those 3 that kind of alternate for my number 1 spot, those are all going to get NYXLs in 10. Now, if you're more of a beginner player or a somebody maybe with small hands, it's hard to get a lot of leverage on the strings, I might recommend a lighter gauge set. Most beginner guitars come strung with 9s, but you could even go to 8s. And in fact, I think I'll link it in the description. A couple of years ago, both Rick Beato and Rep Shull did videos where they compared different string gauges, and they found that 8s actually record very well. They're, like I said, they have that kind of compressed, even sound to them, so those are really good. Now, if you're trying to prove that you're a real man, go for something super thick. Go for huge strings like 11s or 12s. Now, I'm not even making a joke when I say this. Everybody I personally know who plays 12s are big Stevie Ray Vaughan fans, and they're just trying to go for like the, you know, big thick strings on a Stratocaster, Stevie Ray Vaughan kind of sound. Like I said, out of all of them though, for me personally, I keep it simple, stick right in the middle at 10s. So when we compared gauge, we controlled variables, and every single one of those were NYXLs, and everything else, the gauge was controlled variable. And with every other kind of string we tested, the gauge was a controlled variable. So all of the strings that we played throughout the video, except for the NYXLs, were all 10s. So let's go over these. All right, we had two sets of coated strings, the XS and the XT. And basically the XT are a little bit coated and the XS are a lot coated. And I gotta say, it's been a long time since I've given coated strings for electric guitar a real fair shake. And I was impressed with both of these, especially the XS, because I really thought that these were gonna be terrible. I thought they were going to feel like nylon strings when you're playing them. And really, they feel like guitar strings. I made a comparison when we were talking about them initially, but they just feel like semi-flat wounds. So they feel like real guitar strings. These aren't a terrible option anymore. I would recommend these for the player, like I said before, who has like 20 guitars. You know, for your 15 guitars that you never play, these are probably a good option because you're almost never going to have to change these strings. Seriously, probably like every year or so you could get away with something like this. Now, the one that really blew me away were these XTs. These don't feel coated at all. And like I said, obviously, you know, I'm just testing these out for the video, so I can't speak to the longevity of this. But if it bests even the NYXLs, which in my opinion, you know, last very long. The regular NYXLs last a really long time. If this is better than even these could be my new go-to. And in fact, I'm probably going to put these maybe like on the Stratocaster or on the PRS, something where I can kind of test these in the long term. And if you want to follow up on this, keep an eye out, maybe check the email list. Then there were the XTs, and these really blew me away because these don't feel like coated strings at all. In fact, these feel just exactly like the normal NYXLs that I normally play. And the NYXLs already last a really long time. Like I said, these are my daily drivers, and I don't change my strings as often as I should. And finally, we have this whole crop of the XL strings. And these are, like I said, usually a little bit more affordable than the NYXLs, and especially the coated strings. But I wanted to show you guys what different metals and different other, like, call them X factors sound like you know, the wind of the string. If it's a round wound or a flat wound or semi-flat wound or, you know, a wound third or something like that. These are kind of like the variety pack. Let's start with this. Let's just start by comparing the metals. What do I think are the use cases for the different metals? First and foremost, nickel-plated steel. Like I said in the review, these are like the archetype of a guitar string. I think the nickel-plated steel is just your regular guitar string. That's the one that I'm going to stay with. And then when it comes to the rest of the metals, I'm going to rank them right now in order of warm sounding to bright sounding. So not that much treble, a little bit more bass, just a little rounder, warmer sounding, to very bright, very present, very forward, you might call it. You guys could hear it in the review. I'm going to rank all those to my ear right now. I think the chrome set are the warmest. These are both flat wound, which is very, like I said, it's a vintage guitar thing. And if you have a jazz guitar, I would go for the set that has the wound third, because you're probably not going to be doing a lot of bending, and I don't think of bending on a wound string very often. And if you just have like a Strat or a Tele or Les Paul or a non-jazz vintage guitar, I would probably go for the plain third set. But again, chromes are the warmest. A step up from that is going to be the pure nickel strings. These are not flat wound, they're regular round wound. There's nothing crazy going on with the third string. They're just very normal. The only deviation these have from your regular kind of straight down the middle nickel plated strings are that they're a little bit warmer. So it's chrome and then pure nickel. Finally, in the middle, you have just your straight up nickel wound. And then the brightest are going to be the pure steel, or, you know, pro steel is how D'Addario puts it on the package. But these are definitely the brightest, most energetic. Almost always, this is a metal guitar option. And then sort of adjacent to these are the half rounds. These are semi-flat wound. Like I said, they feel a little bit smoother than a regular round wound. These would probably be a good option if you still want a little bit of that flat wound, kind of mellow vintage guitar feel, but you want the tone to be a little bit brighter like the steel strings. And real quick, when we're talking about nickel-plated steel, round wound 10s, right, the regular guitar string, my pick, XL versus NYXL, I prefer the NYXL in my experience, they've always lasted a little bit longer, but truthfully, they do sound and feel pretty much identical. I've just found that these generally last a little bit longer. But like I said, if you were changing your strings all the time, I would want to save the money. And I think they sell these in like big 25 packs. It's like a cardboard box and it comes on a spool. I would probably get this if I was the kind of guy that changed my strings like every week or every 2 weeks or something like that. This is what I would get. I'll throw this little part in at the end of the video. These three, XL, NYXL, and then XT, these would kind of be like my good, better, and then best as far as budget. Like I said, if you're going for high volume or you just need something that's like really, really inexpensive, these are great. NYXLs are kind of the middle option. Like I said, I've used them for years, and again, just to reiterate, I think these are basically identical, but these last a little bit longer. And then finally, XT is going to be, the little bit more expensive option. But again, I think they feel and sound like identical, but these are probably going to last even a little longer because, like I said, they're coated. So anyway, you guys, that is my comparison of all the important permutations of every string that D'Addario makes. I wanted to make this video so you guys could understand all the differences in the strings, and you wouldn't be lost when you're looking at a big wall of strings and you're trying to figure out what to get. Huge thank you to D'Addario for sending me the strings for free. They didn't pay me to make this, but they did send me the strings. I reached out to them and I asked them. I just sent them an email and said, hey, I'd love to get my hands on exactly these strings, and they were great. Huge thank you to Zach, who was great to work with, and truthfully, I actually have played D'Addario for years, so you guys please check them out. And as always, thank you for watching.